I'm on TV. For my friends in San Francisco, how are you? Nine, no. That should wake them up.
That's a laid-back place up there. Do you believe?
No.
You know.
Don't touch the back of the TV. It'll shock you across the room. Know the power. Grab it now.
In the golden age of American television, late-night broadcasting had one unwritten, unbreakable, and terrifying rule: you do not disrespect the king. Johnny Carson wasn't just a talk show host sitting behind a wooden desk in Burbank, California. He was the absolute dictator, the Supreme Court judge, and the ultimate kingmaker of the entire entertainment industry. For 30 years, from 1962 to 1992, stepping onto the stage of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson was the highest-stakes gamble a performer could ever take.
Thank the boys in the band, too. Each and every one of them a real dude in his own right. Look.
If Johnny liked you, if he gave you that legendary nod of approval or waved you over to sit on his sacred couch, your life changed instantly.
This is your first time in Los Angeles? Stay away from the bars with the big Harley-Davidson 8000s parked in front. Because there's big men standing outside those bars. Men, giant men. Men with muscles everywhere. Men with muscles on their eyelids.
You went from sleeping in your car to signing multi-million-dollar Las Vegas contracts overnight. But if you crossed him, if you stepped out of line or made him look foolish, the consequences were devastating.
Magazine through puberty.
Oh, yeah. That would keep me cranking for about 10 days.
You were quietly, cleanly, and permanently erased from late-night history. But every now and then, the heavy multicolored curtains would part, and a different kind of performer would walk out onto the stage.
And he is like I am.
He's wonderful. God.
Yeah.
Uncle John, if you're watching, take care. Don't let him bounce you.
These were the chaos agents. The comedic rebels. The geniuses who didn't care about the corporate rules of NBC or the immense power of the man sitting behind the desk. They looked the most powerful man in television dead in the eye, completely ignored his prepared interview questions, and turned his pristine, structured set into a playground of absolute madness. They didn't just make America laugh, they drove Johnny Carson completely insane, pushed him to his physical limits, and created moments of unscripted television gold that will never be replicated.
Well, Burt Reynolds is here tonight. I don't know how many eggs we have left. His latest film is really the most entertaining film. I saw it the other night, called The Longest Yard.
Today, we are diving deep into the vaults to uncover the untold stories, the backroom rivalries, and the pure comedic brilliance of the 10 most funny guests Johnny Carson ever hosted. To truly understand how dangerous and unpredictable The Tonight Show could get, we have to travel back to the year 1967 and look at a man who fundamentally rewrote the rules of live television, the legendary Don Rickles.
Yeah, I've got a cackle when I laugh.
It sounded like a girl.
That's true, but that's the way you laugh.
That is the way I laugh.
Did you do all the football scenes yourself? I know you used to play at Florida.
Yeah, I did all the running and all the getting hurt myself.
Before Rickles stepped onto the scene, late-night guests followed a very specific script. They walked out, bowed politely to the audience, shook Johnny's hand with deep respect, sat down on the couch, and carefully delivered their rehearsed anecdotes. The host controlled everything, and the guests were just happy to be there. But Don Rickles didn't care about the script. Rickles had spent years performing in tough, smoky strip clubs and neon-lit Las Vegas lounges, dealing with hecklers and drunk crowds by developing a lightning-fast, venomous style of insult comedy.
Over the throat. There's some other things that are interesting about them. You know, the courtship of a crocodile is pretty fascinating. They usually it's geared because of their body temperature.
Yeah.
You know, they don't have water.
He didn't tell traditional jokes with a setup and a punchline, he weaponized personal insults. When Don Rickles walked onto Johnny Carson's stage for the very first time in 1967, the entire energy in the room shifted.
You see, I want to show you how well she can climb. Come on, boy.
Okay.
There you go. Go down here. All right, come up on Johnny. Hold.
Instead of playing the grateful guest, Rickles looked directly at Johnny Carson and said, "Where does it say in your contract that you have to smile like an idiot?" The studio audience instantly gasped. You could practically hear the producers in the control room freezing in terror.
You might sit down for it because...
Now, I notice you have that in a...
In 1967, nobody talked to Johnny Carson like that. But Rickles didn't stop there. He mocked Johnny's immense wealth, joked about his highly publicized and expensive multiple divorces, and openly made fun of his signature fake show business laugh.
Wait a minute. Here, let me.
Look, I'll kneel, you get on me, Waldo.
Go ahead, I'll hold this one. There you go.
He looked at this powerful television deity and casually called him a dummy. Under normal circumstances, this was absolute career suicide. Any other host would have cut to a commercial break and had security escort the man out of the building. But Rickles possessed a psychological cheat code that nobody else understood. He knew that Johnny Carson was secretly desperate to laugh. Carson spent every single night holding the weight of the entire network on his shoulders, dealing with nervous, boring guests who treated him like a boss.
On purpose, you know. You pay. It's a comedy place. Well, this leads me into why I can't get over the carpet is so beautiful.
Isn't it nice? Yes, we try to.
You know,
We want our guests to feel it's kind of a homey atmosphere.
I'll tell you, I took some nubbies about an hour ago, and it's just come on.
When Rickles attacked him, it was a breath of fresh air. Instead of getting angry, Johnny fell completely out of his chair, slapping his wooden desk, crying with laughter, and rolling on the floor. A deep, lifelong real-life friendship was born in that exact moment. Rickles became the ultimate late-night foil, the one man who had a permanent license to terrorize the king.
Or take the bus, and it's a bit long.
So you said to yourself, forget it, I'm not going to be scared anymore?
Yes, and I love it now.
Oh, that's great.
I really do enjoy it.
Do you have any phobias at all? Any unnatural things that drive you crazy?
No.
One of mine is an inordinate fear of Rodney Dangerfield. That's one of my phobias. Great segue to get him out here, right? He's a strange man.
However, in October of 1976, Don Rickles finally pushed his luck just a little bit too far.
They throw jokes at you every place? Yeah. They do at me, you know. Down in Texas, you know, they get the Aggies, which are really the of Texas, the Aggies. One guy said, you know how the Aggies would have handled Watergate? I said, no. He said, the same way.
Johnny Carson had taken a night off, and Rickles was brought in as the celebrity guest host. During the broadcast, while gesturing wildly and telling a joke, Rickles accidentally smashed Johnny's favorite wooden cigarette box, an iconic prop that had sat on that desk for years.
I'd never said a thing like that to you. And I wouldn't say how many flies do you have? No, I was listening with your wife back there, you know. She's so amazed. She didn't know that. She said she prepares your clothes and you only have one. I'm not going to pass any remarks.
Rickles joked about it on air, patched it up with some tape, and finished the show, thinking nothing of it. The very next night, Johnny Carson returned to his throne. The moment he sat down, he noticed his shattered cigarette box. He asked his sidekick, Ed McMahon, and the production crew what had happened. When they told him that Don Rickles had broken it, Johnny's face went completely serious. What happened next became one of the most legendary, unscripted moments in entertainment history. Johnny Carson didn't wait for a commercial break, and he didn't consult his executive producers. He stood up from his chair, looked directly into the camera lens, grabbed a live microphone, and walked completely off the set. With an NBC camera crew desperately scrambling behind him, Johnny marched out of Studio One, walked down the long, sterile concrete hallways of the Burbank studio complex, and exited the building. He walked right into the adjacent studio lot where Don Rickles was actively filming a live episode of his network sitcom, CPO Sharky. Johnny kicked open the heavy, soundproof stage doors and stormed directly onto the set in the middle of a scene. The live sitcom audience went absolutely wild, cheering and screaming as Johnny Carson confronted a frozen, visibly panicked Don Rickles. On live television, the fearless master of insults suddenly looked like a schoolboy who had been caught by the principal. Johnny cornered him in front of his own cast and crew, demanding to know why he had destroyed his property. Rickles, trying to salvage the moment, stammered and attempted to fire back with insults, but he was completely disarmed. Johnny forced Rickles to apologize to the entire nation before walking back to his own studio. It was pure, raw, electric television gold that proved Rickles wasn't just a guest, he was a catalyst for chaos. If Don Rickles brought the weaponized insults, our next guest brought a level of high energy, unpredictable madness that completely altered the physics of late-night comedy, the one and only Robin Williams. In April of 1981, Robin Williams was a rising star, known for his role in Mork and Mindy, but the broader American public had no idea what he was truly capable of in a live, unscripted environment. The moment the announcer yelled his name and the curtains parted, Johnny Carson's carefully prepared list of interview questions became completely and utterly useless. Robin didn't walk to the couch, he ran. He sprinted past the desk, dove headfirst into the live studio audience, high-fived random strangers, and within 10 seconds, he had taken a woman's purse and put it on his head like a helmet while doing a flawless impression of a confused French philosopher. Robin Williams' brain operated at a supersonic speed that defied human biology. He didn't just sit and talk, his mind was a constantly exploding firework of characters, accents, historical references, and physical impressions. Johnny Carson, who was a master of controlling the pace of his show, quickly realized that trying to interview Robin Williams was like trying to lasso a tornado. In one of his most iconic appearances, Robin noticed a simple, clear plastic water cup sitting on Johnny's desk. Without warning, he grabbed the cup and began using it as a prop. Over the next 5 minutes, that single plastic cup became a megaphone for a futuristic dictator, a breast pump, a spacesuit helmet, a tiny hockey puck, and a target for a brilliant, rapid-fire political satire. The true comedy of a Robin Williams appearance didn't just come from Robin himself, it came from watching Johnny Carson's reaction. Johnny, who was normally the smooth, unflappable center of the television universe, was forced to completely surrender. He pulled his chair back away from the desk, folded his hands, and watched in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. He would look directly into the camera lens with a wide-eyed expression that said to the millions of viewers at home, "I have absolutely no control over what is happening right now, and I love it." Robin Williams turned the talk show format on its head, proving that the funniest guests weren't the ones who memorized a clean stand-up routine, but the ones who completely blew up the studio with pure, unfiltered genius. While Robin Williams brought the hyperactive energy, our third guest brought something entirely different, a cool, effortless, self-deprecating masculinity that made him the ultimate late-night co-conspirator, Burt Reynolds. In the 1970s, Burt Reynolds was one of the biggest movie stars on the planet. He was Hollywood's ultimate alpha male, a ruggedly handsome leading man known for high-octane action movies and a legendary, macho persona. But when Burt sat on Johnny Carson's couch, he did something incredibly smart. He completely subverted his own tough guy image. He showed America that he didn't take himself seriously at all, engaging in a loose, charming, and highly competitive battle of wits with Johnny. The chemistry between Johnny Carson and Burt Reynolds was electric because they behaved like two mischievous fraternity brothers who were constantly trying to pull pranks on each other. This dynamic reached its absolute peak during a historic appearance in May of 1972. Burt was sitting on the panel alongside guest comedian Dom DeLuise. Dom had brought out a prop can of whipped cream as part of a bit, and the energy on the set was already playful and chaotic. After Dom finished his segment, Johnny turned to Burt to ask a serious question about his upcoming film. Burt, sitting back with his signature smirk, calmly reached over, grabbed a can of industrial shaving cream that was sitting nearby, and without saying a single word, completely emptied the entire contents of the can directly down the front of Johnny Carson's pristine, incredibly expensive, custom-tailored gray suit. The studio audience exploded into a mix of shocked gasps and hysterical laughter. This wasn't a planned stunt, it was a completely spontaneous act of comedic vandalism against the king of late night. The true genius of the moment was Johnny Carson's reaction. A lesser host would have ruined the bit by getting defensive, angry, or rushing off to clean themselves up. But Johnny understood the comedy of the straight man. He sat completely, perfectly still. He didn't move a single muscle. He just stared blankly ahead into the camera with a deadpan expression of pure, quiet defeat as the massive mountain of white shaving cream slowly melted down his chest and into his lap. He then calmly reached over, picked up his pencil, played his signature desk game, and slid his monologue papers over the mess as if nothing had happened. Burt Reynolds proved that true comedic legends didn't need to be professional stand-ups, they just needed the confidence to turn a multi-million-dollar broadcast into a beautifully chaotic pie fight. But the funniest guests on The Tonight Show weren't always Hollywood actors or stand-up comedians. Sometimes, the greatest comedy came from people who weren't trying to be funny at all. Enter Jim Fowler, the legendary wildlife expert and host of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Jim Fowler made over 100 appearances on Johnny Carson's show, and every single one of them was a masterclass in physical comedy and situational absurdity. Jim was the ultimate straight man. He was tall, rugged, and intensely academic, approaching every segment with the serious demeanor of a scientist trying to educate the American public about endangered species. But the wild animals he brought onto the stage had a completely different agenda. The formula for a Jim Fowler segment was simple but perfect. Jim would bring out an incredibly large, rare, or terrifying animal, and within 30 seconds, that animal would completely ignore Jim and target Johnny Carson. We saw giant marabou storks with 6-foot wingspans refuse to stay on their perches, flying directly onto Johnny's custom wooden desk and knocking over his coffee mugs. We saw unpredictable spider monkeys climb up Johnny's suit, wrap their arms around his head, and pull his hair while Johnny sat frozen in terror. The comedic brilliance of these moments came from the immense contrast between the two men. While Johnny was hyperventilating, holding his breath, and giving terrified looks directly into the camera lens, Jim Fowler would calmly continue his lecture. Jim would explain the mating habits or the natural habitat of the creature in a perfectly smooth, professorial voice, completely ignoring the fact that a wild bird was currently destroying the host's property or that a predatory cat was staring at Johnny like he was lunch. Johnny's authentic, unscripted fear paired with Jim's absolute academic calmness created an irreplaceable genre of late-night comedy. If Jim Fowler brought raw physical chaos to the set, our fifth guest brought something completely different, an intellectual, meta-comedic deconstruction of television itself. His name was Albert Brooks. Long before he became an Academy Award-nominated actor and filmmaker, Albert Brooks was a young comic who revolutionized the way people thought about talk show routines. Albert didn't walk out and tell traditional observational jokes. Instead, he treated his appearances on The Tonight Show as conceptual art pieces designed to mock the entire entertainment industry. He was a comic for people who were tired of traditional comedy. In one of his most famous and historic appearances on the show, Albert Brooks announced to Johnny and the audience that he had decided to take up a classic, old-school variety show art form, ventriloquism. He walked out onto the stage with a traditional ventriloquist dummy sitting on his knee. But instead of performing the act properly, Albert completely collapsed the illusion on purpose. He would ask the dummy a question, and then, without even attempting to hide his facial movements, Albert would openly open his mouth, scream the dummy's response in a completely different voice, and look back at Johnny as if he had performed a flawless piece of magic. He intentionally moved his lips, threw his voice terribly, and dragged the corny, traditional showbiz format through the mud. Johnny Carson, who had started his own career as a magician and deeply loved old-school variety acts, was utterly fascinated. He recognized the sheer, brilliant satire behind Albert's meta-comedy. Albert Brooks showed the nation that you could be deeply funny by failing on purpose, changing the landscape of postmodern humor forever. This postmodern absurdity found its ultimate commercial champion in our sixth guest, the unparalleled Steve Martin. In the mid to late 1970s, Steve Martin was a full-blown cultural phenomenon. He was selling out massive football stadiums for stand-up comedy, something that had never been done before in human history. And his path to that legendary status ran directly through Johnny Carson's stage. Steve Martin was Johnny's favorite absurdist. When Steve walked out, he didn't look or sound like any other comic of the era. He wore a pristine, bright white three-piece suit, had prematurely gray hair, and would perform with a ridiculous plastic arrow going straight through his head. Steve Martin's entire comedic persona was a brilliant parody of a bad show business performer who thinks he is a genius. He would walk out with immense, unearned confidence, play the banjo completely seriously, perform terrible magic tricks that failed spectacularly, and yell his catchphrase, "Excuse me." Johnny Carson absolutely adored him because Steve's comedy was incredibly fresh. Johnny had spent over a decade listening to traditional comics who used the exact same setup punchline structure. Steve Martin broke all of those conventions. Every time Steve appeared on the panel, the energy in the studio didn't just rise, it exploded. The interactions between Johnny and Steve were filled with a mutual respect for the absurd, where Johnny would happily play the straight man to Steve's wild and crazy guy persona, cementing Steve's place in the pantheon of late-night greats. While Steve Martin brought stadium-level absurdity, our seventh guest brought a relentless, rapid-fire machine gun of one-liners that became an indelible part of American pop culture, the king of self-deprecation, Rodney Dangerfield. Rodney's story is one of the most inspiring and hilarious in show business. He had tried to make it as a comedian in his youth but failed completely, walking away from the industry to sell aluminum siding to support his family. It wasn't until he was in his 40s that he returned to comedy, developed his iconic, high-anxiety persona, and finally got his big break on The Tonight Show. The moment Rodney Dangerfield walked through the curtains, adjusting his red tie and sweating under the studio lights, the audience knew exactly what they were getting. His catchphrase, "I get no respect," became an instant national phenomenon. Rodney didn't tell stories, he fired off punchlines at a speed that left the audience gasping for air. He would sit on the couch next to Johnny and rattle off lines like, "I told my doctor I broke my leg in 2 places. He told me to stop going to those places." Behind the scenes, Rodney's confident stage presence was actually fueled by immense anxiety. He was so terrified of bombing on Johnny's show that he would secretly write up to 50 alternative one-liners on the inside of his French shirt cuffs right before walking out, ready to switch his entire routine based on how the crowd reacted to his first joke. But the second he hit that panel, his nervous energy turned into pure comic genius. Johnny would lean back, completely mesmerized by the sheer volume of high-quality jokes Rodney could deliver in a single segment, making Rodney a permanent fan favorite. If Rodney Dangerfield used anxiety to create comedy, our eighth guest used raw, unfiltered, and deeply vulnerable truth, the incomparable Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor brought a level of edge and honesty to late-night television that had simply never been seen before. In the 1970s and 80s, network television was heavily censored, and talk shows were expected to be safe, family-friendly environments. But Richard Pryor refused to put on a fake showbiz mask. When he sat on Johnny's couch, he didn't just tell jokes, he shared deeply personal, painful, and often shocking stories about his life, his childhood, his struggles with addiction, and the realities of race in America. Richard Pryor possessed the unique ability to take the most tragic, dark moments of human existence and convert them into hysterical, universal comedy. Johnny Carson had immense respect for Richard's artistic honesty. Their conversations on the couch didn't feel like a standard promotional interview where a guest plugs a new movie. They felt like two masters of their craft having a genuine, deep, and human connection. Richard would make Johnny laugh so hard that Johnny would have to wipe tears from his eyes, but a second later, the audience would be completely silent, hanging on every word of Richard's raw commentary. Pryor showed the world that late-night comedy didn't have to be shallow, it could be deeply emotional, dangerous, and hilariously real. While Richard Pryor represented the cutting edge of the new generation, our ninth guest represented the ultimate peak of classic, old-school Hollywood royalty, the legendary Bob Hope. Bob Hope was a national institution, a man who had been entertaining American audiences across radio, film, and television for decades before Johnny Carson even got his first job in broadcasting. Because of this massive legacy, the dynamic between Bob Hope and Johnny Carson was completely different from any other guest on this list. Johnny had grown up idolizing Bob Hope, and when Bob walked out onto the stage, he was treated with the absolute highest level of institutional respect. But the real magic of a Bob Hope appearance didn't come from safe nostalgia, it came from a brilliant, subtle, and highly passive-aggressive battle of wits between two different eras of comedy. Bob Hope was a master of the traditional, tightly scripted topical monologue, and he relied heavily on large cue cards held up behind the cameras. Johnny Carson, who was a master of live improvisation and spontaneous reactions, couldn't resist making subtle, hilarious digs at Bob's reliance on his writers and cue cards. Johnny would look at the audience and mimic Bob's signature posture, while Bob would fire back with a devastating, highly polished Hollywood insider quip that showed Johnny exactly why he had been the king of comedy for 50 years. Watching these two titans trade gentle but sharp comedic blows was like watching an exhibition match between two heavyweight champions, proving that the old guard could still match the energy and sharp wit of the new late-night era. Finally, we come to the 10th guest on our list, a performer whose late-night journey represents the most groundbreaking, meteoric rise and the most dramatic, heartbreaking collapse in television history, the brilliant Joan Rivers. In the mid-1960s, Joan Rivers was a struggling female comic performing in tiny, basement clubs in Greenwich Village, constantly being told by male executives that women weren't funny and couldn't make it in late night. But in 1965, she finally got her chance to audition on the stage of The Tonight Show. The moment her segment ended and she sat down on the couch, Johnny Carson looked her dead in the eye and uttered the famous words on live television, "God, you're funny. You're going to be a big star." With that single endorsement from the kingmaker, Joan Rivers' life changed forever. Her comedic style was sharp, aggressive, and completely revolutionary. She talked openly about topics that women were expected to keep quiet about, using her catchphrase, "Can we talk?" to instantly connect with millions of viewers. Johnny Carson absolutely adored her. He didn't just invite her back, he made her the permanent guest host of The Tonight Show, meaning that whenever Johnny took a vacation, Joan Rivers was the person who sat in his sacred chair. They were the closest professional allies in Hollywood, a mentor and a protege who dominated the late-night ratings together for years. But in 1986, this historic partnership suffered a sudden and catastrophic collapse. The newly formed Fox network was desperate to enter the late-night television market, and they offered Joan Rivers a massive, multi-million-dollar contract to host her own show, titled The Late Show starring Joan Rivers. This new program would broadcast at the exact same time as The Tonight Show, placing Joan in direct competition with her mentor, Johnny Carson. Fearing that NBC executives would find out and sabotage the contract before it was signed, Joan kept the deal a complete secret. She did not call Johnny to tell him the news before it leaked to the national press. When Johnny Carson found out about the deal through a media announcement, he took it as a profound, unforgivable personal and professional betrayal. He felt that the woman he had discovered, mentored, and protected had stabbed him in the back for money. Joan tried to call Johnny at his home to explain her side of the story, but according to reports, the moment Johnny heard her voice, he immediately hung up the phone. He never took her calls again, and he permanently banned Joan Rivers from the stage of The Tonight Show for life. The ban was so absolute that even after Johnny retired in 1992, his successor Jay Leno maintained the blacklist out of respect for Carson's memory. Joan Rivers did not step foot back onto The Tonight Show set for 28 years, finally returning as a guest in 2014 when Jimmy Fallon took over the program. It was a tragic, dramatic end to the most successful and funny partnership in television history, proving that while Johnny Carson's stage could create legends, the business behind the laughter was a high-stakes battlefield where a single move could cost you everything. These 10 extraordinary individuals didn't just entertain a nation, they pushed, challenged, and transformed Johnny Carson's couch into an eternal monument of American comedy.